Hello and welcome to the Cinema of Ideas, the Independent Cinema Office's virtual screen, a forum for collaboration, discussion and film. My name is Duncan Carson. I'm the Projects and Business Manager at the ICO. For anyone who needs a visual description, I'm a white man in his 30s with brown hair and a beard and glasses, wearing a white and black jumper. Just in case this is the first you've ever come across the ICO and the work we do, we are the UK's national body. We support independent cinemas of all forms, and our activities include programme, training and events, and a lot of that is free and is all about getting more people to show films in communities. So a special welcome to audiences from our partner cinemas who are tuning in across the UK, and audiences from our ICO network. And thanks especially to our funder for Cinema of Ideas, who's the BFI, awarding funds from the National Lottery. Just before we kick off this evening, I'm going to cover a few housekeeping things, so all of the exciting bits can be covered by the good folks you'll be hearing from very shortly. So a few things to say. The event's being live captioned. You should be able to see those on screen now. Thank you to Andrew, who's handling our live captions this evening. The event's being recorded and we're available to view on the ICO's YouTube channel. If you love this discussion and want to share it with friends who, to foment rebellion yourselves, please do share that once we share out in the next couple of weeks. And thanks also to my colleague Sammy, who's doing the technological aspects tonight. The discussion is going to last about 40 minutes with time left at the end for comments and questions. But if you want to get involved in the conversation before that, please do feel free to put comments in the chat and we'll pass them on to the panelists. Don't feel like you have to hold until the very end. We're going to try and finish promptly at 8. I just wanted to let you folks know about, if you've tuned in tonight, you're probably interested in some of our other Cinema of Ideas events that we're putting on in the next few months. So the next program we're going to be hosting from the 3rd to the 17th of March, we'll have a program of short films created by our most recent group of Feds trainees. And the program's shining a light on the exciting new work coming out of Nepal and the diaspora by Nepali female filmmakers, and looks at themes of community, gender and women's rights. We're going to be hosting a live Q&A on Wednesday, 9th of March at 6 p.m. with some of the filmmakers, and a special poetry reading by Lakshmi Ray. So if you go back to the Cinema of Ideas website, where you probably reached this event, you can be able to see that going live very soon. And if you do enjoy tonight's event, do tell your friends about the Darning workshop that's happening this Saturday morning with Fast Western Therapy. They're going to demonstrate how to show your old favourite pieces in need of some love, how to get them back up to a fully functioning dance floor ready. So, there's not much more to say, but I'm really grateful to welcome Joe Reed, who's curated this season. Joe's one of the Cinema Ideas emerging curators that we were looking to support some new voices on this platform. And when I saw Joe's application with this very, very fully formed idea, it really stood out for its ambition, and I'm really glad to see it come to fruition now. The films, which I hope you get a chance to check out while they're live until the 5th of March, are amazing, just terrific, really exciting way of throwing the subject into relief. But I'm really glad for the events as well. They're really something fun, and hopefully you'll have seen the amazing artwork commissioned for this series as well. So it's been my absolute pleasure to work on this program together, and I'm really happy to hand over to Joe now.
Hiya, I'm Jo. I'm a Glasgow-based film curator and writer, and I've programmed this series, Stitched Up, and I'm really excited to get started with this discussion. So just for a visual description, I'm a white woman in my 20s with short curly hair, a sort of pink jumpsuit on, and I'm in a white background of a bedroom. So I think without much further ado, we should just get started. I'll introduce our panelists today. So first of all, we've got Ruth from War on Want. We've got Amber Sunner, a freelance journalist who's been sort of researching and writing on exploitation on UK garment factories, and Grace Bezic, an ethical fashion activist and enthusiast. So if we could just get started with Ruth, could you please describe the sort of work that War on Want carries out to support garment workers internationally?
That's great. Thank you, Jo. Thanks for the introduction. And just as a visual introduction to myself, I'm a white woman in my 40s, and today I have orange hair. I'm wearing glasses and sitting with a white background with a sort of tapestry panel display. Um, okay, so yeah, War on One is a charity. We've actually been going for about 70 years, and it was formed from a concern to tackle the root causes of conflict, poverty, inequality, and human rights abuses. I say that because people wonder about the name. And so at the time, there was the Korean War, and people who formed the charity spoke about wanting to have a conquest of world hunger. So hence, War on Want. From now, we've been involved in a number of campaigns and also support for organisations, including garment workers around the world, to change the fact that we live in a world of colossal inequality, really, where we have around sort of 1% of the richest people having nearly half the world's wealth. We believe that poverty and inequality are political, they're not accidents, and that they are the results of the decisions that are made by those who hold power, so governments and corporations, and that it's a broken economic system. So it's generating a lot of wealth for power and elites, but it's at the expense of the majority of people. So we don't actually work exclusively with garment workers or on the fashion industry. We also look at issues around trade, corporate accountability, land rights, climate justice. But fashion is a focus for us because it's such a good and bad example of an industry that generates huge profits, trillions, and yet that wealth is not being felt by the millions of workers who are making our clothes. And also now an industry that's the second biggest polluter and contributor to climate crisis, etc. Now, our work in support of garment workers, it includes a number of things. So one of that is campaigning in the UK. So for example, for laws that will control the power of corporations, including fashion companies. We do take up the cases that involve UK fashion brands, for example, where workers may have been dismissed for being part of a trade union, or recently the issues that happened when workers weren't paid when COVID broke out and companies started changing their orders, etc. We also provide sort of practical support in terms of funding for trade unions and workers groups, particularly in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. That helps them with training and organising, and that's very important. And we also publish reports that look at the fashion industry and kind of exposing some of the issues I guess we're going to talk about. So yes, that's War on One and the work that we do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. So just moving on to you, Amber, could you please just sort of give us a nice overview of the sort of issues that face garment workers living and working in the UK currently?
Yeah, sure. So firstly, I'll give a visual description. So I'm a lady in her 20s who's Indian, and I have glasses on my head. Yeah, so there are a lot of issues that I have investigated in the garment industry. I've done 2 full investigations, and I found really awful things. I talked to a factory worker last year who said they were paid £3 an hour, which is shocking, and that was in Leicester in the UK. And I'm from Leicester. I've had family members work in garment factories, and they have said that the conditions that I had last year have not changed, and they were working there 20 years ago. So that is a really good indicator of how things aren't moving along in the garment industry. The same factory worker told me that the toilets weren't clean, bringing up sanitary issues for garment workers. And they also said that there were rats in the building, meaning more sanitary issues. And I talked to another factory worker because I really believe getting to the heart of the issue is talking to the workers who are experiencing this awful treatment. And so the second worker told me that her boss said to her that workers are like machines. And she was totally shocked, and so was I, because human beings are not machines. They deserve fair wage, they deserve sanitary conditions, and they deserve functioning work lives. And also COVID, like we said, has exacerbated all the issues in factories. There was a Sunday Times report that said there were no face masks and no social distancing, meaning people got ill. And this was in Leicester, my hometown. And we were the first city to go into a localised lockdown, meaning that these issues are not just confined to the factories, but the whole city itself. And I did talk to the Deputy Mayor of Leicester. He said it's not just a Leicester issue, which I totally understand, because there are fast fashion factories that have underpaid underpaid workers in Manchester, but it is a government issue, I think, because the deputy mayor did say to me that we have asked the government for powers to intervene in the factories, but Leicester City Council was denied them. So I fundamentally believe that is a government issue and also a corporation issue, like Boohoo, Fishy Little Thing. They are the drivers of fashion and these garment factories. But I think at the end of the day, the government needs to intervene.
Thank you so much for that, Amber. It's so comprehensive and yeah, really harrowing, really hearing those descriptions of workers in Leicester. So moving on to you, Gracie, you've made the move away from fast fashion in your own life. Could you describe a little bit more about that process, or why and how you moved away from consuming fast fashion?
Okay, hi, yeah, I'm Gracie, and I run a social media account called Thread to Roll. Just as a visual description, I'm a white woman in her 20s, short brown hair, glasses, a really scruffy background, and a very hungry caterpillar shirt. And yeah, so fast fashion is something that's been really important to me. Moving away from fast fashion has been really important to me for like a pretty good stint of time now. I think I'm really lucky in that I had a fantastic teacher in high school who was my textile teacher, and she actually took it upon herself to just kind of tell us a little bit about sweatshops. And I think this must have been around the time where it was kind of it came out that Primark was using some child labor in their in their factories, and she also told us, and I don't know how true this is, but she told us that like sequins in the factory industry could only be sewn on by hand, and it was a job that was often given to children to do. And so I'm really grateful for her for kind of having this conversation with us, though I did kind of view it in quite a black and white way. And I took from it, it's like, right, I'll not stop at Primark and I'll not buy anything with sequins on. So that was when I was about 12 or 13. And I was just like, yep, I'm being the best ethical person. This is great. This is the one. So kind of, and then the kind of other component to ethical fashion that I kind of didn't realize I was doing from a perspective of ethical fashion at the time was charity shopping. And again, this was another kind of chance thing, that on the walk home from my high school to my house, we actually just passed a lot of charity shops, whereas actual like kind of fast fashion shops were in the city centre, which would have been further. So it was just the kind of thing that me and my friends would like pop into the charity shops and just sometimes buy things, sometimes not, but we were just quite comfortable being in there. And the kind of third thing as well for kind of this initial ethical fashion journey of mine was I got into sewing quite young. And I think my mum bought me a sewing machine when I was about 10. I don't think I asked for it. I think she just kind of thought it'd be something I enjoyed, and I kind of made a lot of really frumpy dresses for like my teddy bears and like things like that. And I kind of had quite an interest in sewing. But those things are all quite separate for a while. And I kind of, as I got older and I got maybe into like social media, I kind of found a lot of YouTube videos that were kind of sort of DIY fashion, kind of sewing things, and kind of a lot of like instructions, tutorials, and just kind of, I started watching a lot of that content. And then in 2013, the Rana Plaza factory collapse happened. And that was what really, really kind of pushed me into kind of ethical fashion. For anyone who doesn't know, the Rana Plaza collapse was the deadliest garment factory disaster in history, which took the lives of 1,134 people. And it's a horrendous thing that happened, but even more horrendous knowing that basically the day before the factory collapsed, workers had spotted these cracks in the building, and they went home and they said they were unsafe. They didn't want to go back there. And there had already been all of these problems reported with the building. It was known that this was a dangerous place to work. But managers actually threatened to withhold a month's wage for workers who refused to come to work the next day. And so basically got people back into the building, and then the building collapsed. And I'll say it again, 1,134 people, mostly women, and unfortunately including an awful lot of children, because there was a nursery on site as well. And I just found out of this really mostly through YouTube and kind of social media stuff. I think I did see it a bit in the news, but it was actually kind of watching videos from other quite like, 20-year-old YouTube creative, people just kind of talking about what this actually meant and who were the people who use these factories, and just really like giving this much deeper understanding of like the scale of the fast fashion industry, that it's not just Primark and it's not just clothes with sequins on, like it's this like pretty much every high street shop uses unsafe factories and unsafe working conditions somewhere along the supply chain. And kind of no matter what, like the price point that the clothes, like buying more expensive clothes does not mean that they're not being made using child labor, slave-like labor, dangerous working conditions. And that was kind of the final push for me to just and I kind of just decided from that point, like, no, I'm not going to buy fast fashion. And I still kind of mostly, and to this day, I still get most of my clothes secondhand from charity shops. I get some from like Depop or eBay, where it's a bit easier to find specific things. I make some clothing, not very much, and I occasionally buy things from brands that I kind of do trust that are to be ethical brands. But yeah, since kind of getting this interest in kind of moving away from fast fashion, and really being inspired by a lot of like other people on YouTube and on Instagram who were kind of making content about fast fashion, the fast fashion industry, and about sewing and crafting and creating and kind of ethical fashion. I kind of I started making my own YouTube videos where I'd kind of like be upcycling something from a charity shop or kind of making something random. And then I made an Instagram, and it was kind of a way to mostly track my own like sewing journey, from very enthusiastic but not very good sewing creations to mostly wearable things. But I also think that kind of getting into sewing and enjoying sewing and making things from scratch has really added an extra like level of appreciation to kind of, when I think about, when I do look at clothes and stuff, like I just cannot comprehend how you can see a t-shirt in a high street shop for like £8. Like I know how many steps it takes. I know like how much fabric costs, and I know that obviously like professional sewers are a lot faster and you can bulk buy fabric a lot cheaper, but it's still a thing of like, it's incomprehensible how cheap clothes are. And this is kind of before the kind of new wave of like places like Boohoo and other, not just Boohoo, but like Boohoo, I'm trying to think of the names of the other ones, but those kind of online based kind of shops that don't have like a, you know, but you kind of see having like these crazy clothing sales where you can get a thing for 1 pence or something like that in this sale, and it's just this thing of being like it doesn't make any sense. And it's kind of whereas like yeah, I don't really know where I was going with that thing. I'm just like, yeah. But so that's my very rambly thing of my own kind of journey. But it's just been such a nice thing as well, because kind of just talking about it and talking about my own decisions and kind of why I started doing things certain ways. I have got like 1 or 2 friends who've completely stopped kind of shopping fast fashion kind of as a consequence, which has been so lovely. And I've also got a lot of friends who are kind of maybe just a bit more mindful about how they shop, which again is like, it's just fantastic. And it was really, really special as well at my graduation. Like my family just decided to, and I didn't even ask them to, but they just decided to do a Threadful roll like graduation day, and all wore like secondhand things for kind of my graduation. And it was just really nice to kind of see that, you know, I might not be making like the biggest impact or reaching the most amount of people, but it's still kind of that way of like chipping away and kind of encouraging and enlightening people about like the situation, and kind of maybe giving some prompts or ideas of kind of ways to mitigate it, or like just little things you can do that kind of might help in the bigger, you know, bigger picture.
Thank you very much, Gracie. And I know that you've definitely impacted me and changed my approach to fashion. So now this is just a general question for everyone really, but we've sort of brought up a lot of the issues that exist with garment workers and what sort of causes these, but what attitudes do you think we need to change to support garment workers internationally, and how do we change these attitudes? It's an open question, so whoever wants to jump in, just jump.
Well, I think one thing that's very interesting and brought out by what Amber was saying about factories in Leicester and Manchester is recognizing that the industry has changed a lot. So it used to be the case that, you know, clothing was made in the UK, was sold in the UK and worn by people in the UK. And then we saw through the 70s and 80s how it, you know, globalization completely changed that. So actually a lot of those, you know, high street shops we shop in, they're not making clothes. They market them, they persuade us to buy them, but they're not making them. And that's happening largely, that's what had moved overseas. And then we get examples like Leicester where we see actually this is what was happening there is happening routinely in countries around South Asia. So I think one thing that's important is to sort of to not think about it as a problem over there, but to connect these issues. And it's not actually just fashion, but these things happen with technology as well, and with food. So I think one important attitude to change is we have to, and Gracie was talking about sort of that, you know, the push to buy and to consume things. And in the UK, we buy an awful lot more clothes actually than other countries in Europe, and most of that ends up in landfill. So there's lots of questions around, you know, our attitudes to clothing and to fashion. I would say one thing is about it doesn't have to be this way. That it's not, this is kind of presented as an ever-growing, ever more profitable business. It can't be stopped. And I think one thing is to actually sort of say, well, actually, no, we need to think about this. It's destroying lives and planet, and how can we go about that change? So I think one of the things is questioning that profit motive in fashion. Fashion is a creative industry, but it's currently in fast fashion. It's a money machine. It's making billionaires and it's impoverishing millions of people. So one attitude is that we have to kind of challenge that. It's how it has to be. And these profit margins are wafer thin because, as I said, it's an industry that's producing billionaires, and it can change. And I think the other thing to say, and Amber mentioned it, about workers being very central and listening to them. There's sometimes a view that people experiencing poverty or in these situations are victims, and they kind of can't champion their own struggles, and they really can. They know what's going on. They can see those mechanisms going on. So I would say we also need to sort of try and avoid a division between consumer and worker, but actually try to see how we understand and kind of bring change sort of together in ways that will actually get better results.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think that is so important to think of. It's not just us be them. We've got to work together, basically. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add to that?
Yeah, so I've mainly investigated UK fast fashion, and I talked to experts, and they said the attitude towards foreign garment workers who work in UK factories needs to change, because garment workers in the UK who come from South Asia or Romania or wherever, they are frightened to whistleblow because they may not have citizenship. And I talked to a trade union and they said, yeah, like we can't go into the factory. You find it hard to go in because bosses are saying, no, you can't. And there are reports of trade union workers getting hit at factory doors. And so, yeah, it's hard to infiltrate garment factories, but also the attitude towards the workers needs to change, because if they do whistleblow, then they're at risk of getting deported. And a lot of the family that I had that have worked in fashion factories, they're legal now, but they weren't when they were working. And yeah, they said we were so frightened to talk to authorities, and so that connection I have has really opened my eyes to the vicious cycle that is ongoing in UK factories. Because people come here for a better life. They don't want to throw it away like that. They'd rather knuckle down, get £2.53 an hour, which is around £6 below national living wage. They'd rather get that than get deported. So yeah, I do have that personal connection, and the attitude towards the legal or illegal status needs to change. And the deputy mayor said to me, he said, if garment workers do come forward, then we can protect them. That's obviously a very vague statement, and I don't think there is a lot of protection that can be given to them. So yeah, the legality, I'd say.
Thank you very much. I think it just goes to show that this is all just like interconnected. It goes beyond just the fashion industry, but also how we view immigration, and all these different struggles are definitely interconnected. Are there any other thoughts here, or shall I just move on to the next question?
I
Okay.
might just add actually that, because Gracie mentioned something about sometimes we can pick up on certain brands, like, oh, it's a Primark, or it's Pretty Little Thing, or it's, you know, one or the other. And I think one thing that's important is, and there's questions around, well, how can I be sure that this is ethical? And without trying to be too downbeat, it's very difficult. And it's not about actually singling out one brand or another, because it's a whole sector. Yes, there are some companies that will have a better record, but I wouldn't say that therefore, you know, by that is sort of an answer. Unfortunately, I think sometimes a kind of a boycotting approach can have a negative impact on workers, because it's seen that obviously there's job losses, but also we end up with a kind of a divide between, well, the people that can afford ethical fashion and the people that can't, and we kind of actually put a false division between low income communities here and workers overseas, and sort of make it out that, well, you have to have a cheap t-shirt and therefore you have to benefit, as it were, from someone else's exploitation. It can come across as a sort of a divisive thing, whereas I think if looking at the mechanisms, like, why is it that that's being sold so cheaply, people are making huge profit, and yet, you know, that doesn't come down. So I think it's also about understanding there's no, you know, great good guys in this. There are clearly good companies that should be applauded for the efforts they're making, but as an industry, it's really it's systemic, and picking out one or two helps us bring out the issues, but it does need to be change across the board. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to touch on that as well. It's just, I know this maybe seemed kind of like contrary to what I was saying before, but yeah, I really don't think that this is like an individual person's responsibility. It's, you know, an enormous issue, and yeah, it is much bigger change is needed. And it's kind of as well, a lot of the companies that maybe aren't being dragged in the press for, oh, this revelation, it might just be they're better at hiding it. It might just be that things aren't, you know, coming to light. In a lot of cases, you know, factories may be producing clothes for lots of different companies and lots of different brands, and then they'll kind of, you know, have a different, you know, a different label, a different price, you know, on each one. But, you know, it's not as simple as being like, oh, that's cheap, there it's bad, or it's bad, and this is really expensive, it's really high end, that way it's really good. And another thing to be really careful of is that unfortunately a lot of brands are now picking up on like this kind of energy, particularly coming from a lot of young people, from the kind of like environmental perspective, that people do really care about things like things being eco-friendly. So you'll have a lot of something that's kind of referred to as greenwashing, which is like companies that will kind of try and promote themselves as, you know, a really ethical or environmentally friendly company because, oh, they make their t-shirts are 100% cotton. They may be 100% cotton, but they're still being made in unsafe working conditions. And yeah, it's kind of just a thing that you do have to be vigilant. And again, yeah, it's not as simple as like boycotting a certain shop. My 12-year-old self boycotting Primark for all those years, that wasn't the big solution. That wasn't the thing. I still do that because, to be honest, that's just what sits right with me. Like I found a way to, like, I just don't need to buy new clothes like that, and that's just worked for me. That's been a long process, and that's what I'm really comfortable with. But I think as well as kind of putting the onus on people to fix the world individually is bad on so many levels, and not least for kind of sustainability. If you're someone who really likes clothes, you really like dressing up, you really like feeling confident and nice, and then you say, okay, clothes, you know, fast fashion is bad, I'm not going to buy any new clothes, and then you feel miserable, and then you give up, and then you go back to buying it, and maybe with a bit more bitterness towards people who don't do that. It's a really inefficient system. And actually, I think we've all kind of across the board for all kind of like environmentalism and kind of, you know, transitioning to maybe more ethical kind of way of doing things. It's the little baby steps that is just going to make it so much easier for you to stick with something. Yeah, and kind of like just going like cold turkey, kind of boycotting things is not necessarily, you know, the most impactful or the most beneficial for anyone involved.
Thank you very much. I think this ties in really nicely with a question/comment from Jackie. I'm just getting in the chat, which is, I also make clothes, but Gracie's comments have made me wonder about how we can be sure of the ethical background of the fabric we buy, conditions in textile factories, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I don't really have a response to this. Sometimes it just feels like everything's rubbish. Yeah, I don't know. I guess, again, it's that kind of thing of like, you can only, you know, only do as much research as you can. Like, it is great to kind of contact places and ask them and kind of see if they have policies, see if there's anything you can find out, anything you can dig up. Oftentimes people have already done kind of research. I'm not sure necessarily how much towards like kind of like fabric manufacturing, but like, you know, for clothes and stuff, you can sometimes just Google how ethical is this, you know, brand, and kind of people will have done this and kind of given you a report, so it's kind of easier. I guess if that is a concern, just other ways of trying to maybe use secondhand fabric. Things like a lot of charity shops will sell like bedding and stuff, which is quite nice for sewing, or old curtains, or even just sort of upcycling clothes you already own, and kind of, you know, finding other ways to kind of, you know, get fabric, and, you know, particularly it's always great to use stuff that already exists, because we just have so much textiles in the world already. Like, we don't really need to be, you know, making more. We just have like such an incredible surplus already. But yeah, I don't know about how ethical, you know, fabric companies are. Yeah, hopefully it'd be lovely if they were all great. Wouldn't it just be nice if actually it's always fine?
Thank you very much. So just on to our next question. So what challenges have you all faced when you've fought or supported workers' rights? What are the challenges that you've come across? Ruth, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I think one of the big things has been sort of mentioned in all our different responses, and something is around transparency. Gracie mentioned how in a factory you will have things that are made for different companies. We know some companies publish their factory lists, like what they call a first tier, so the one that ultimately puts the goods on the ship and sends them off. Many don't do that, but even beyond that, there's just such a dense network of you know, I think it's about 800 plus factories that make clothing for Marks and Spencer's. It's over 1,000 for Zara. I mean, it's huge. So one of the challenges is making this link between who's responsible, who should be held accountable, and that also came out very strongly with Leicester, didn't it? Because it was a bit like, oh well, we didn't know anything about that, you know. And so that's a real challenge, because it's an important step. That transparency is important because it also gives trade unions and workers that information that they need to be able to take the other steps. So if we get legal accountability, we still need to be able to know who are making our clothes. That is a challenge. It's not the only one, but it's one that I think I'll just bring out because it came through from some of the things we said. And I think the other thing is certainly one of the biggest challenges we see in War on Want, and why we provide practical funding support for trade unions and workers groups, is it's absolutely vital that workers have their basic human right to join a trade union and to act together, because it is them on the front line. It is them who, if they can, you know, individually feel quite powerless, but collectively are powerful, which is why there's often such a pushback when workers do try to come together and form unions in many countries, and why the benefits of that, you know, whilst brands certainly won't say they're against them being in trade unions, they're quite happy with the status quo as it is now. So it is a challenge that a number of unions all around the world increasingly are experiencing repression. And we see that in the garment industry really quite strongly. There's a number of reports on it. But really, that's very important to support the growth of those unions, because they don't just fight the issues in that particular factory, but they're also important in those countries about shaping the laws that ultimately kind of, you know, about wages and health and safety, and holding that to account. So that is it's a challenge, and why it's such an important thing that we actually really do. You know, it might not seem the most exciting thing to do, but supporting trade unions really is in this instance, and in countries around the world, and for garment workers in particular.
Yeah, I totally agree with Reese about who is responsible and who is accountable, because the hearing, which is a governmental hearing, the CEO, Mr. Kamani, said it's not our fault, it's factory bosses. And then when you ask the factory bosses, they say, no, it's we who are undercutting us, cancelling their orders. And I know it's not just we and fast fashion is like a $1 trillion industry, but that is one clear example of how a fast fashion company is feeding this issue of who is to blame. And then Mr. Kamani started saying, you're the government, you should get involved. So there is a lot of finger pointing there. And personally, I have faced a few challenges fighting for workers' rights. So I was trying to get a government contact to talk to me for my second investigation. And that was a very hard interview to get, obviously, because it's holding the government to account. And I had to draw up an extensive contract that said I would not publish the interview aside from the investigation. And so that was a personal challenge I faced.
Thank you very much. Just looking at time, I think we're going to just move on to our last question now, before we go on to a wonderful audience's questions. So what is the one thing that someone watching at home can go out tomorrow after this to do to support garment workers?
I might potentially have more than one, but I'll try and say them quickly. I think just it's really good to kind of think about first thing definitely is to remember that it's not one person's journey, it's not one person's mission. Find organizations that are doing the work that you feel passionate about, and see how you can support them, whether it's financially, whether it's signing petitions, whether it's just like sharing on social media, kind of bringing more awareness and things like that. But then kind of, again, if you are kind of wanting to be a bit more wary about what you're wearing, just ask questions, look for vagueness. If you really like a company, if you really like a brand and their clothing, just send them an email. They might not reply, but you can only try, you can only ask, I really care about this, I'm passionate about this. Just try and show that the demand is not just for fast clothing. We as consumers, just try and show actually do care about the people making these clothes, and kind of won't be complicit in kind of allowing all the crap stuff that happens. It's just that thing of being like, I'm not gonna be blinkered, and that's kind of a lot of this stuff can go ahead because companies know that there is this, demand. Things have to be, really quick, really speedy, cut corners, get things done, deliver the clothing, deliver all the new micro trends, kind of keep that momentum up. But actually, I think if trying to put any kind of pressure on slowing down and doing things more conscientiously.
Yeah, I definitely agree that I think as well as that, maybe looking at how we want to change our own lifestyles and be less subject to pressures around consuming things, that's sort of within individual sort of realms. I definitely agree. It is about collectiveness. So, as I said at the beginning, we believe this is about the decisions of very powerful elites and governments and corporations, and to challenge that, we need to act together. So finding those, obviously I'm from a campaign organisation, so I talk about it. But for example, we're looking at, legislation in the UK that would hold corporations, including fashion, but not just fashion, to account for the environmental and human rights damage that they cause. So that's about being able to, get hold of your MP, finding those organizations and joining them. One thing I would give my own bit of advice on is be very wary about voluntary kind of corporate social responsibility approaches only. Nothing wrong with those, but they don't replace, we've said one of the problems here is that power of companies to be unaccountable. And so we really would strongly recommend that people look for those organizations and those campaigns which ultimately are going to make companies have to account. Yes, it's fine to support other initiatives, but they don't replace the need for those legally binding mechanisms. And as I said, if you look on our website, for example, there are a number of campaigns we're running, which will sort of, around trying to pressure for more of those sort of mandatory measures, and asking questions. Absolutely. Someone said they feel very accountable about, being sustainable and being green because they know there's, particularly, young people have really led the way on that. But for, 40 plus years, they've not felt as accountable about workers' rights. But if we tell them we want to know, that's they have to respond to that. So I think really asking the questions, whether you get an answer or not, is not necessarily as important as them knowing that people are looking and asking those questions. That's also very helpful.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything that Ring covered. Also try to get involved in protests. A lot of them are hidden, and so they are organised, but they're not in the public eye. So you kind of got to get into the groups that organise protests, and then you'll slowly find out where they're occurring, at what time, get a placard, go to a fast fashion store and make your voice heard, I'd say.
That's also great. Thank you so much for your words of wisdom, everyone. So just looking at audience questions here. So first of all, we've got, how do you get out of the habit of wanting to buy new things?
I think that's a really good question. And I know retail therapy is kind of a bit of a mocked term, but I think it's kind of silly to pretend that we don't get a buzz and a nice feeling from buying something new, or kind of acquiring new things, or just having that little burst of sunshine moment. But I think it's in terms of clothing, I think it's just really good to kind of think about maybe more about investment pieces, or this is a thing that I want now, but will I want this in 6 months' time? Will I still wear this in a year's time? And a lot of the time you can kind of, I'm just such a big advocate for things like borrowing from friends and just kind of expanding your wardrobe that way. Or there's even companies as well now where you can hire, well, I think that always has been, but I feel like it's getting more and more common. There's all these startups where you can hire outfits. So if you're going to a wedding and you kind of want that opportunity to wear something brand new and exciting and get dolled up, there are other options rather than just buying something that you might only wear once. That you can borrow something from a friend, you can rent something for a special occasion. I guess kind of how to get out of the habit of it. just if it's something that you want enough, like, or you want to move out of that habit enough, like I think you will kind of be able to see the bigger picture, or kind of just find your own reasons. And if not, maybe, you know, you do still buy things new, but maybe just try and buy maybe slightly less than you would before. Maybe try and avoid like impulse buying. Maybe like, oh, I want this top. If you still want it in a week's time, maybe think about it again. But if it's just kind of I'm having a bad day, I want to buy something on ASOS, you know, maybe just like close the tab and come back a bit later and still see. I think, yeah, maybe those are some things to try.
Okay, and we've also got, there is a rich history of films that dramatize or shine a light on the exploitation of workers in clothing factories. Can Jo tell us why she selected the films in the season? Okay, so the films, we've got 3 films in the Stitched Up season, 2 feature-length films and 1 short newsreel footage. So basically, all 3 films look at activism within garment factories. So I first chose Made in Bangladesh. That was sort of the first film I decided on because it's quite recent. It was made in 2019 and it's based on interviews and research by real life garment workers. And I think it's a really great film at showing the struggles and the challenges it takes just forming a union. We've spoken already before about how factories, they're not too keen on workers coming together in that sort of real concrete way. And I think it's a great film for humanizing and putting a face to the issues. So I think, you know, rather than a documentary, which I think documentaries have been really important and have been really successful in raising awareness, I think having a fiction drama like this is an interesting counterpoint and a way to maybe potentially get people who aren't willing or just not interested in watching a documentary. You've got that bit more of human emotion behind it. And I think it is that thing that sometimes fiction can tell a different kind of truth. So that was sort of my initial plan. And also, you know, it talks about the issues in a really real way. And then I came across The Pajama Game, which is a completely different film. It's a 1950s Hollywood golden age musical, and is very of that time. And I thought it was so interesting that you have this film that was made in the 1950s America, you know, a time that was not kind to labor, workers' rights, community organizing, anything too communist. And yet somehow you've got this musical that is all about a union. It's a strange thing of that it's interesting that it being set in a union. The union itself isn't the issue, whereas in Made in Bangladesh, it's all about having to form this union. It's about, but the union's already there. It's about getting, you know, wage rise. But of course, it's still tied back by all this strange, like American sort of left-wing fear of the time, where you've got your heroine falling in love with her manager, and it's this push and pull of, oh, can I be with you because you're my manager? And in the end, the union aren't really that effective. They don't really do anything in the end. It's kind of all solved by management realizing that the boss was, well, spoilers, the boss was lying. And so you've got this unions being seen as something quite normal, but still not really that effective. And I thought that was a very interesting counterpoint to Made in Bangladesh. And I also think that musicals are quite fun. And then my third film is from the Media Archives of Central England. So it's just a short news clip following a protest that was happening in Nottingham from garment workers there hoping to basically stop foreign imports because this was really damaging the knitwear industry at the time. And I thought it was interesting to having those real life voices, and also that reminder that these issues aren't something that's just happening over there. It's got this is a British issue. It's got a long history. And I think we even mentioned it before about how the way, you know, these issues still remain in Britain. So that was sort of my thinking behind the programming there. And now we've got a question from Pamela, which is, how does not buying new clothes help garment workers?
That is a really good question, and one I think we should try to focus on a bit, because the answer to it is it doesn't directly actually help garment workers unless it is part of what is a transition. Joe, you mentioned that film about how in Nottingham workers saw imports of clothes, and that was taking away jobs. Now that if what we say, this industry is terrible, it's bad, which we've kind of agreed that there are, if we say, well, we should just stop, what happens is, for example, in Bangladesh, 4.2 million households rely on that industry. A bit like with fossil fuel industries, you have communities and livelihoods that depend on these industries. So cutting them out, or that very sharp change, isn't in itself the solution, but it is about looking at what else needs to be in place to make that transition and to make that fair. So not buying the new clothes in itself doesn't, but for example, making a companies accountable for having to pay severance when they exit from a factory, making it those things mean that there should be there. Also, tax changes to ensure that the companies that are making such profits have to countries have to have the capacity to invest in their own health, education and social welfare systems, so that there are alternatives to the sweatshop. So I think it's about that, goes hand in hand with other things, and together those make sense, because it is a transition. In itself, stopping isn't really an answer. It's about what new things we do, not just in terms of buying, but what new actions we can take to create that kind of better future for people and for our planet as well.
I think Ruth just phrased it beautifully, so I don't actually have much to add on to that. But I think not buying new things maybe comes under more of the kind of like environmental kind of aspect of ethical fashion, in that we do just have a huge amount of clothes already, and we have this, unfortunately, a bit of a revolving door system of a lot of people buying a lot of clothes and then disposing of a lot of clothes can quite quick turnaround, a lot quicker than it's ever historically been, and a lot of those clothes do end up in landfill. Just wanted to add on here that I don't know if it's been posted on the Instagram, I think, and the Twitter, but the bit of textile art created by is it Kirsty Wiley? She's made this like lovely like piece of embroidery that says like, there is no ethical consumption under capitalism, but we can still try. And I think that's just like a nice way of doing it, is that like, no, not buying anything, boycotting certain shops and not buying new products is not going to help garment workers. And also like, garment workers making clothes is a skilled job. It should be a job for life. It should be a job that's going to provide financial security and stability for families. It's so important, and this is why we need to do our bit to kind of protect those people working in the industry.
Thank you so much. I think I'm going to sort of call it there, just looking at the time so that we can finish. But yeah, I just want to say thank you again to all of our wonderful panelists. I think tonight has been so interesting and productive, and I feel like I've learned a lot. So I really appreciate everyone coming down and sharing their knowledge and experience and insights. Yeah, so just thank you again for coming, and thank you everyone who's out there watching. Thank you so much for taking an interest and coming along and asking your interesting questions. I really appreciate it here. And also thank you as well for Cinema of Ideas for having us and hosting us, and for Duncan and Sammy for doing all the behind the scenes work to make this happen, and also to Andrew, our captioner, who's been making sure this event is got live captions. So thank you very much again. Sorry if there's anyone I've forgotten to thank, but it's just so wonderful to have everyone here. I'm all very excited. It's been fantastic.